I like the dreams of the future better than the history of the past. This Sunday, much needed on a Wednesday, I will elaborate on the history of darkness, or the dark black cube, and its opposite, a future of light with its light white cube. The quote, I like the dreams of the future better than the history of the past, is a sentence from a letter by Thomas Jefferson, and it is the ideal start to this week's topics. That sentence is the very definition of love when it comes to time. In that, in the temporal dimensions hierarchy priority of time, more weight is given to a potential better future over the dark past. And since last time I checked, time and subsequent change affects everything and is the core algorithm of the universe, to which everything and non-thing, every object and every subject is affected by. So by definition, if time and change is the queen and king of the universe, then the sentence from Thomas Jefferson is the literal formal definition of love. Love exists in time and not in some form of fixed objective space. Dreams are the human ability to project any or a better vision of the future compared to the past. Hope is the human ability to project a hopeful future from a hopeless past. Faith is the human ability to project a faith in the future from a faithless past. All these three words give priority to the temporal dimension of the future. And maybe you realize by now that you can exchange all these three words in the sentence and quote by Thomas Jefferson, and it will have the exact same meaning. And by now you might have realized that you can exchange the word love, and it is interchangeable with all the three words above. So systemically speaking, love is the ability to see beyond the past and present of hate and project a future of love instead of the status quo of past of hate. Again, you can exchange love for any other word with its dualities, namely dreams and nightmares, hopes and hopelessness, faith and faithlessness, and the sentence will still be correct. Because simply, love, hope, dreams, faith are one and the same. They all need consciousness in an individual and freedom to be able to project and see beyond the issues of the past and present into a better future. In super simple, super technical definition of love is individuality. To be able to love, dream, hope, have faith, you need an individual, conscious human being that can look out beyond its fixed and forced bias. In fact, that is the definition of consciousness, the ability to be present and out of the reach and effect of the subconscious, fixed and forced biased thinking patterns and ideas that are imposed on an individual. The more individuality and consciousness that you have, the less you are driven by subconscious, mechanical, robotic, passive, biased ideas. And the opposite, the more collectivity and subconsciousness that you have, the more you are fixed and biased and tribal in your worldview, which gives no room for true freedom, love, dreams, hope, faith, so forth and so on. If you remember from the previous essay, the example with the cryofrozen ape, That state of being completely frozen and completely unconscious for 1000 years, there is barely any difference between the two states. So being completely frozen and being completely unconscious. You can view collectivity and unconsciousness simply as you view a robot, a predestined and unchanged set of code functions programmed into a robot which it blindly follows. Is no different from the set of law, environments and ideologies that are forced onto humans and which result in subconscious humans following blindly subconscious, non-local, non-individual, collective code functions and algorithms. The only difference being, for robots today, you don't need violence to control them, but for controlling humans, violence and deceit have been the core law ever since the beginning of time itself, if it ever had a beginning. Super simply, individuality means your ability and freedom to assess the past, present, and future with more accuracy. Simply, the more accurately you can map the knowledge of your environment and beyond, the more individuality that you have. And by now you should realize that if you don't have basic freedom or individuality to assess your past, present, and future, by definition you can't have love, dreams, hope, and faith. This is complete understanding and knowledge, or CUK for short, what I have called, if you remember from previous essays. Or in other more known terms, this is your soul, a repository of all your temporal dimensions and its information and knowledge throughout all three dimensions of time and beyond. If you have been following all these essays chronologically, I have elaborated the primordial time of when religion was born, and now I will elaborate when religion was reborn. Religion was reborn out of the primordial war of terror, which plunged the planet into an endless loop of war, violence, and force as law that continues to this very day. You can imagine the environment of the planet and its systems being within a complete planetary black cube or dark room, where almost total collective subconsciousness was the state of being. And in such a never-ending loop of subconsciousness as law, the queen and king of the universe, namely time and change, slowly produced an antidote to the collective state of disease. And the antidote to endless subconscious violence of fixed and forced alignment is the individual conscious human, which turns towards love, dreams, hope, and faith. You can imagine it extremely simplistic, how certain individuals diverted towards love and chose to preach for a better future. Because of deprivation of love and unending violence, a simple collective realization of the existence of the temporal dimension of time, namely the future, this simple collective realization started a collective movement which today we call religion. You can imagine how in this ancient past the need for freedom was so great that only preaching for a better future and offering probably help with housing and food was extremely needed and appealing due to the collective state of literal and metaphorical disease. You can imagine the rebirth of religion, something similar to what Mother Teresa was doing. Super primal and bare minimum help of housing, basic medicinal healing, and food. Now, some individuals genuinely devoted their life helping people during these times of global disease, or at least to help, and some individuals deviated to deceitfully abuse the collectivity or collective gravity of the rebirth of religion for profit, utility, political movement, and you can imagine how both sides slowly were collecting more and more people and slowly started to form the literal first institutions and form the first forms of governance. In simple words, religions, as you can imagine, through time gained a lot of power, and how these power structures turned to the first governments of certain religions of the planet Earth. They turned to the first theocracies, but you can imagine it as a certain form of a government. In other words, the very first forms of organizing people collectively, something comparable to today's governments, were the ancient past religions that formed out of the rebirth of religion. And by now, you should be able to imagine how the initial simplistic two strands of genuine religion and deceitful religion evolved and fused through time, transforming into today's elaborate religions with all its varieties in our today's world. Basically, religions evolved from a basic, genuine preaching and helping, with enough time getting drunk on collectivity and the godlike powers that collectivity has over society and individuals. Uh, it slowly evolved into modern religions of literally giving you a blueprint of the universe, which is a fixed and is forced onto populations. So the evolution of religion from trying to wake up the unconscious individual and collective from the nightmare of the past into today's religions of completely trying to control people by controlling their CUK or soul, and projecting and pushing the individual towards a light or dark cube, and literally and structurally push the individual and collective towards unconsciousness with its performative and forced alignment structure. I cannot express it with words how tragic the evolution of religion truly is. Until no more than 100 years ago, religious wars were the norm on this planet, and not surprisingly, religion, even at this very moment in time, in 2026, is one of the core forces that pushes towards division, war, darkness, and simply unconsciousness as norm. In super simple words, what religions did for most of our history and what they do today is the complete opposite of its literal function of existence, which is super simple: helping enlightening individuals, some basic objective and subjective help towards a better future. Now, as opposed to the history of darkness and the dark black cube that I have previously mentioned, I will try and briefly explain it again. You can imagine history of darkness as an environment. Imagine entering a dark room environment, and your vision and general senses are put in an environment where you can't analyze and have information about the environment. Or super simply, in that environment you are put in a subconscious state by a fixed and forced alignment, an environment where you can't have information locally. the information is served hierarchically, collectively. Entering a dark room is the perfect analogy for such an environment, namely being in a dark black cube. Firstly, you are in the dark, with your senses barely functioning, and secondly, the darkness is enclosed with the borders of the room or cube, which represents the forced and fixed alignment power structure. The opposite of the history of darkness is the future of light. Light in this context meaning simply information, an environment that allows for information to be available and usable by individuals. You can think of the future of light as a state of a system or environment, a state which prioritizes knowledge over ignorance. To make it even simpler, think of future of light as a free and performatively free projection of the future on a certain object or subject. Or super simply, a projection of the future with the main purpose being to create a better future, or performatively project a better future, but the end result is always at the expense of the individual and collective. Think of it as an environment, same as with History of Darkness. Think of future of light as entering a room with normal lights being on. An environment where you are first and foremost free to use your vision and all your senses to identify and analyze and interact with your environment, and subsequently being able to identify your past and project your future. As opposed to the black cube, imagine it as a white cube. Imagine it as a transparent cube, an environment that you are able to interact with, just like when you enter a generic room with basic lights on and are able to interact with freely. Now the catch here is that just as darkness blinds you, the brightness of light can blind you as well. Imagine you enter a room which is illuminated to a blinding degree. Imagine lights and reflectors at every corner of the room and the walls, and basically light emanating from everywhere inside the room. This sort of super light saturated environment with saturated information and knowledge is what I have called previously a radically open system or environment, as parallel to a radically closed system. Same as entering a dark room, entering a room with blinding lights is no different. You are blind from the saturation of light information because in such environments, divisions literally don't exist. Therefore, all information, good and evil, healthy and unhealthy, progress and regress, so forth and so on, every division that exists is dissolved within such an environment into a soup of ideas of docileness and confusion. Same as a super dark room, a super illuminated room doesn't allow for a clear and authentic interaction with the environment, namely the past, the present, and the future environments. Same as in the dark room black cube environment, if you have been in such an environment your entire life, you do not recognize the corners or of borders of the room from the darkness itself, and that you forgot that you have entered the room in the first place, or the room has been forced onto you. Therefore, the problem is not only that you are subconscious in such environments and systems, the real problem is that you even forgot and forgo the possibility of consciousness or individuality. And the same applies for the Lightroom white cube. If you have been in such an environment your entire life, a radically illuminated, saturated environment makes the borders of the white cube or room disappear. or it makes them appear invisible and endless in almost literal the same way as darkness in a room doesn't allow the individual to see the borders of the dark room black cube. The radically open white cube and its false promise of a future of light, and the radically closed black cube and its maintenance of a history of darkness, are the very two political forces that have plagued planet Earth. Radical relativity is the core law of such a type of white cube environment and system with saturated information. As being totally open is absolute law, total openness calls for maximum weight towards radical acceptance of all divisions, and therefore, through time, subsequently the aim is to dissolve all divisions through radical acceptance. With radical relativity in a super illuminated room saturated with information, there is no difference between wolf and sheep. In fact, it's even worse. From the saturation of information, one can easily clothe a wolf as a sheep and vice versa. And just how corruption, crime, and violence flourish in a super dark room environment with low visibility. Corruption, deceit, and violence flourish in a super light room with low visibility. Religions were and are the first abusers of the white cube and thus are highly efficient in abusing this white cube or cube of light environment and its effects. With the maintenance of a history of darkness and a performative hyperbolized future of light. You can think of religions as the first collectivists that abused the collective gravitational tendencies of people gathering towards religions and its collective organizational structure, and how these collectivist tendencies slowly through time and evolution migrated to monarchies, families, politics, and today's modern politics, governments, and its political waves. Simply put, religions were the first experts to create, abuse, and maintain the collectivist radical powers of the history of darkness. And through time, religions were the first experts to create, abuse, and maintain the collectivist radical powers of the future of light, or the white cube. So simply a never-ending cycle of status quo and false promises. This should sound very familiar for in comparing the modern types of politicians. By now, you should be able to imagine how religious promises and its patterns became political promises and its patterns. Religions have followed a simple pattern throughout their entire history. A never-ending history of darkness is presented as an internal problem which leaks into the present and in the future. And at the end of literal time, a promise of hyperbolized radical future of light, or in other words, heaven. Simple, a maintenance of the past and present and future of total darkness, with a promise for a future of total light and prosperity. It just comes with a simple catch. You have to blindly follow the fixed and forced alignment ideology. This, in other words, is the literal hijacking of one of the individual's most important functions, which I have called the CUK, complete knowledge or understanding, or the soul, which was and is completely controlled by such structures of collectivity. By making the individual blind to its environment, its past, present, and future, the human individual is put in a susceptible environment of control and gravitation towards collectivism around the radical dark and white cube. Instead of individual local knowledge, non-local knowledge is the only source of knowledge when one is blinded within the environment of the radical black or white cube. Now you can imagine and see more clearly the dualistic division of what issues and systemic organizational structure types people gather around or collect around, politically and socially. As I said in previous essays, people gather around individual and collective issues. And by now you should be able to guess under what issues people gather around most and at which side are issues radically leaning towards and why. Collective issues are pathologically more present and enabled as compared to individual issues throughout our entire social, political, and religious history timeline. And the answer is simple. Collective issues are most effective and most likely to garner and collect more people. This has been identified by our first collective structures of organization and power, namely religions. Religions realize that people gather and collect most frantically around the history of darkness and the future of light, or the black cube and the white cube. And almost all religions in the past and today, almost all governments and politicians abuse both these segments of the most frantic collectionist tendencies, namely the tendency to gather around a past of darkness, a forced fixed alignment environment of total control with the black cube as law, is by definition one of the most effective ways of organizing and blindly gathering and collecting and managing humans in large groups. In all cases, when people gather around, collected with forced and fixed ideologies, they are always provided a solution for the unending history and present of darkness with an unreachable bright future of light. The literal analogy of how people are forced and remain within a collectionist black cube is the carrot on a stick analogy, and in this case the carrot is the future of light that is forever held in front of controlled subjects up until their death. Now people gather around the promise of a future of light by default, so the radical white cube is by default gravitational when it comes to collectivity. The gravity of the black cube is facilitated and maintained with fear, violence, and force. The gravity of the white cube is facilitated and maintained with a performative freedom in combination with subversive and covert violence and deceit. The radical white cube and its ethereal promise of a heavenly future is a super magnet when it comes to making people gravitate towards future-oriented promises as solutions to the issues of the past and present, or in other words, collective issues of the past, present, and especially future. The radical black cube and its ethereal promise of a heavenly future out of a hellish past and present is a super magnet when it comes to making people gravitate towards fear-oriented collectivist issues of concern, uncertainty, and unsafety. On your computer or mobile phone where you are watching this, you have a brightness scale, and you can imagine that brightness scale when you put it to its minimum, a 0, your screen goes completely black, and when you push it to its maximum, your screen becomes completely white. Now imagine for the entire history of our planet, the individual and subsequently the collective has been continually put in an environment of complete darkness or complete light, political ideologies and promises, in much as the same way that your screen went completely black or white, and in the very same manner that you are not able to interact with your reality or computer or phone when your screen is either completely black by force or completely white by deceit. In both situations, the human individual for the entirety of our planet's history was blind and deep in a forced alignment structure. So religions and politicians for millennia and until this very day have abused collectivist tendencies of gathering around a completely black screen and abused collectivist tendencies of gathering around a completely white screen. Radical problems and promises are most effective at gathering people around the black and white cubes, and these two segments of collectivism have been abused to a demonic degree, to the point that today the planet is slowly leaning towards global war, with wars and potential of wars emerging almost everywhere. Our collective image has been abused and persecuted and controlled to such a degree that it always must erupt into violence, conflict, and wars, just like magma inevitably erupts from a volcano. The tragedy is that volcanoes are supposed to do that, whereas humans have been put in this position of endless forced alignment and control. And an outburst of conflict, hate, violence towards random groups in proximity that are put at odds with each other by the very black and white cube that is always looking for a target dissenting group, which is made into the scapegoat of the system, and inevitably the system swallows, destroys, or genocides the target dissenting group or individual, which is demonized as the culprit of all problems. And within a radically controlled environment, the controlled citizens, which are tired and fed up by the violence and deceit as law, are offered a sacrifice to satiate their fear of the past, present, and future. And that sacrifice usually involves a dissenting group or individual. You can imagine how today's bureaucrats in forced alignment governments, by being controlled themselves as the citizens are controlled, and how the facilitation of the forced alignment system is propagated in institutions by giving enormous leverage to bureaucrats to the point that they have almost absolute control towards citizens and especially individual citizens. Simply put, an individual within a forced alignment expects others and its peers to be forced aligned by the individual. A group that is forced aligned expects its peers to be forced aligned by the group. Just as violence begets violence, forced alignment begets forced alignment. If the government is led by forced alignment, then its citizens are led by forced alignment. If the citizens are led by forced alignment, then the citizens' families are led by forced alignment, and this leads to a never-ending collective history of darkness and never reaching a future of light, carrot on a stick situation. So, literally, with forced and performative alignment of deceit, a few people hold godlike power, and that godlike power cascades and is delegated downward the pyramid as a Ponzi scheme of deceit and forced alignment, where from the very top to the bottom, forced alignment cascades as law, And if you live and promote and facilitate the deceit and forced alignment, just like a Ponzi scheme, you benefit the most, the more people are subject to your alignment of force and deceit. You can collect a lot of loyalty, a loyalty which is further incentivized to facilitate the forced alignment through forced deceit and violence. And as such, from the very top of the uh, pyramid to the very bottom of the pyramid, every level is controlling its approximate downward cascading peers with a simple rule: be ruled by force, violence, and deceit, and rule by force and violence and deceit. Just like a Ponzi scheme, the entire pyramid benefits from the forced alignment and its loyalty generation. Only the very bottom of the pyramid suffers the most, and relative from the perspective of bureaucracy and government with a forced alignment Ponzi scheme, the bottom of the pyramid are the citizen which bear the entire burden of the scheme. And by being the last level or group that is force aligned, the only environment where the plague and infection of force alignment can continue is the citizens' families. I hope by now you can clearly see how infectious and destructive forced and performative alignment is, and how it infects the entire population, and how every level of the Ponzi scheme from the top is able to infect and at the same time reason and normalize the entire Ponzi scheme of violence, force, and deceit. Continuing from where I left off in the previous essay, this week I will continue to the Black Cube of Albania, Balkans, and Europe. I have mentioned the Albania's past, but I have not mentioned Albania's ancient past. The history of Albanians has been tampered with, distorted, and completely destroyed by the Black Cube of Turkish, Ottoman, and Slavic Orthodox and the Roman Empire. If you remember from the previous essay of how the Turkish Black Cube distorts and changed the history of a very famous church, Hagia Sophia, in its capital city. Now, if its Black Cube tendencies of distortion are so apparent in its own capital, imagine what this Ottoman Black Cube has done to the history of Albanian people. Let's start with some simple facts. The Albanian language is the most unique language that has its own strand of evolution, and it is not clear where it is directly descended from, or by which culture it evolved from. Our history has been distorted so much and so deeply to the point where we cannot trace back our language origin. And due to the destruction of Albanian history, the Albanian past is speculative. Now, in the very same manner that the Albanian collective soul is sabotaged by positioning the population in a history of darkness or a black cube, where its history is not clear and continually trampled, the Albanian individual carries a mutilated soul by not being able to freely explore and live its authentic history. In order to explain ancient Albanian history, we need to briefly talk about Jesus, of how his demonstration and work expanded and where it expanded to, and how it was distorted. So, the region where Jesus died and was crucified is somewhere around here. And you can imagine how the teachings of Jesus slowly spread from here, and gradually it reached Greece and the Balkans. It is widely accepted that Albanians are the descendants of Illyrians. The Albanian ancestors lived around the entire region of the Balkans. So something around like this. This was the region of ancient uh, Illyria. So the Albanian ancestors lived around the entire region of the Balkans, and I strongly believe that it was a high-end culture society for that time and in that region, meaning that it was way more sophisticated culturally than its neighbors. To put it simply, ancient Illyria was what Europe is today for the Balkans. It was a highly sophisticated culture relative to its neighbors. And just like Europe is being invaded today, first culturally because of its sophistication and prosperity, and eventually forcefully, the ancient Albanian Illyrians were slowly invaded and ultimately destroyed, and its history destroyed and buried by a collectivity of forces. The teachings of Jesus spread slowly, and you can imagine how his teachings in some parts were taught correctly and some parts distorted, and how the powers that be at those days, namely the Roman Empire to the west of the Albanian and the Slavic tribes to the east of Albania, realized the collectivist gravity of the teachings of Jesus, and just as in the evolution of religion that I explained, the teachings of Jesus were institutionalized in the Roman Empire and Slavic tribes. Before the teachings were institutionalized for the purpose of control, the spread and originality of the teachings was very well accepted by the destroyed Illyrian Empire and its pagan culture. And the remaining population of what was the Illyrian Empire after the collapse of the empire and after the death of Jesus, the remaining population has accepted the true teachings of Jesus and incorporated the teachings in its culture. It makes a lot of sense. A sophisticated empire that was collectively destroyed without any fault. Jesus' teachings would resonate a lot with the collapsed empire of Illyria. And thus, I strongly believe that the remaining Albanians, after the fall of the Illyrian Empire, were some of the first real followers of Jesus. So you can imagine this region in the middle beholding the real and secular side of the teachings of Jesus, and the Roman Empire to the left here, and the Slavic tribes to the right, slowly abusing the collective gravity of Jesus and institutionalizing his teachings for further control. Simply put, just imagine the Illyrian society here with a secular form of Christianity, and on its left side, a forced alignment institutionalized Christianity was forming, and on its right side, the same was happening, but from a Slavic tribes. For such forced alignment societies that institutionalize the teachings of Jesus, a population between them with a secular free alignment of religion and teachings of Jesus was a massive splinter in the eyes of institutionalized religions. Therefore, the haunting and persecution of the remaining Albanians sandwiched between the Western and Eastern institutionalized religion of Jesus was and still is an ongoing trend. Now, if this sandwich of terror and destruction, of institutional terror and destruction, wasn't enough, for 14 centuries after the fall of the Illyrian Empire, a third force entered the game of destroying Albanians and its soul. The Ottoman Empire, starting around the 14th century, started a never-ending campaign of invasion and destruction. So from the west and from the east, sandwiched between two theocratic, institutionalized religions. So from the west and east, sandwiched to destroy the secular Christianity present, and how Albanian Catholic secular churches were destroyed or completely transformed into Orthodox or Roman churches by the Black Cube of the West and East, in the same manner that Hagia Sophia is black cubed in Istanbul. And Orthodox Serbia, to this very day, abuses this historical fact that it perpetrated churches that were Catholic, especially in the region of Kosovo, were black cubed and converted to Orthodox churches, and Serbia, with its lies, to this day uses this absolute distortion of the black box of Albanian history and religion to claim regions of the Albanian region. Again, as if the terror of the West and East wasn't enough, the terror from the South completely invaded and genocided the Albanian population to the point of completely forcing the entire population and region into a black cube of forced conversion to Islam. So let me just depict it a bit more clearly what was happening. So you can imagine basically how the teachings of Jesus arrived in the Balkans, and slowly in the region of Albanians, of the fallen empire of Illyria. You can imagine how this society slowly accepted the original teachings of Jesus. And from the left here, the Roman Empire institutionalized the teachings of Jesus. And from the right, the Slavic Empire as well institutionalized the teachings of Jesus. And how this sandwich between the two was the perfect environment for both the institutional forces to squash the secular Christian Albanian citizen. And if this wasn't enough, so you can imagine how slowly Illyrians were genocided and killed slowly. And slowly this region started to shrink. You can imagine it slowly shrinking it like this. And it continues shrinking with the institutional terrors from East and West. And if that wasn't enough, the Ottoman Empire in the 14th century, after Roman and Slavic empires continually attacked the Albanian soul, the Muslim Ottoman horde completely invaded the population of Albania. And you can imagine how, from the time of Illyria, this region was slowly genocided and killed by the East and West, and how this region, let's say, it became something like this. And then after the 14th century, the Ottoman Empire, with its campaign of genocide and terror, further reduced the Albanian regions and populations to what I have into something like this, which I have mentioned in previous essays, that this is the approximate true region that today Albanians inhabit. So today there are Albanians right inside these blue borders, let's say. Now, in a previous video, I have showed you the current regions where Albanians inhabit, but no more than 100 years ago, the regions that Albanians inhabited were even greater, and the pattern of genocide and terror that is pushed into the Albanian population and how its territories and population were shrunk and genocided. And this 100-year-old history is still ripe and well documented. So let's say before the current this current border that I drew of Albanians inhabiting the regions, before this border, let's say it used to be something like this. So there were massive Albanian populations here in Chameria, and you can imagine it scattered around Greece like this. You can imagine it scattered around like this. Different Albanian populations being scattered no more than 100 years ago. And as it is well documented, genocide in Chameria from the south, from Greece, genocide from the Slavic side and the Muslim side, incorporation in a collectivist corporation, have been continually pushing the Albanian border to be smaller and smaller and smaller. So let's try and draw it again. So no more than 100 years ago, Albanian populations were genocided in the south, in the east, in the north, and within its territories everywhere by the Ottoman Empire, by the Slavic terrors and Orthodox terrors. So basically, you can imagine how slowly these regions were shrunk. So let's try and depict it. So this is the current region where Albanians are present outside of the official borders. And you can imagine how this was even bigger, and how no more than 100 years ago, the Albanians that inhabited these regions beyond the current regions where Albanians inhabit, you can imagine how these regions were genocided. So you can imagine it from the Illyrian times, how slowly the Albanian or The Illyrian population shrunk from this to this, and slowly, with every wave of terror, slowly the Albanian population was boxed and boxed more and more into a smaller and smaller space. And the latest genocidal push from the north, east, south happened no more than 100 years ago. So you can imagine how entire regions were killed and massacred for the region today to be something like this. Regions with entire Albanian populations and Albanian region names were completely genocided no more than 100 years ago. Albanians from the south of Greece were completely annihilated up until Chameria, a region right in the border of today's Albania. From the north and east, deep within the regions of today's Serbia, Montenegro, Bosnia, Albanians were massacred and genocided, with probably a lot of undocumented villages and populations entirely vanished or annihilated from the face of the earth. So in short, the history of Albanians is super tragic, and the current state of Albanians is super tragic because it is invaded and controlled still by the black cube of terror of the West and East and South. And in modern times, the control is maintained by the black cube and facilitated by the white cube. Let's take an example of what the white cube is doing to the Albanian population. I hope you did not forget the analogy with a room entering a very bright light, which reduces visibility. In other words, a highly saturated environment with information. The white cube of European media, ever since the day one of the Flamingo protests of Albanians, has been distorting the reality of the situation, and hence it continues maintaining the black cube of terror within the population of Albanians. For more than 2 months, the majority of reports of the European media can be boiled down to a single sentence. Albanians are protesting Ivanka Trump Kushner's real estate investments, which is a complete distortion of the reality of the situation. And not only a distortion, but a weapon used towards the American administration and its voters. Bear with me for a second. Instead of European media doing their job and analyzing and evaluating and reporting the real situation and problems of the Albanian population, which is a population and institutions completely controlled by the Slavic and Islamic terrors and its corruption. Now, instead of the media reporting and evaluating the depth of corruption and terror, the media abuses the protests and produces reports 2 months straight of blaming Trump investments as an attack towards the USA administration, and at the same time distort the reality by portraying the protests as resentment towards some luxury buildings or plans. Can you see through the white lies of the cube? Instead of reporting the reality of the situation and helping Albanians and the world realize the horrors that it is controlled by, the terror radical white cube of the West, instead it reports a attacking and blemish campaign for 2 months, attacking the American administration, while at the same time distracting the world from the real cause or symptoms of the reality of the Albanian situation. Can you see through the white cube and its saturated information and distractions instead of real reporting of the reality of the situation? The white cube attacks the US administration, which is oceans away, and distorts the reality of the situation of Albanians at the same time. So I guess the old Roman Empire is still lurking within the European Union, and Italy is the ancestor of it. Therefore, Italy is strongly helping towards keeping the Albanian population enslaved within a black and white cube. Adding to the list B of European countries with unending lust towards power and control that push toward a forced alignment or performative alignment future, and a future with an inevitable World War III. Adding to that list is Italy and its powers that be. The Old Rome and the Orthodox Slavs have enslaved the Albanian population for centuries and completely annihilated its Christian, Catholic, secular culture, together with an old and new friend, the Islamic Black Cube. By now, you should realize why I analogously compare the situation of Albanians with the situation of the West. Albania was simply a Catholic, secular, freedom alignment population, much like the West is today. And with collectivity from west, north, east, and south, the Albanian population is put in a black cube with a burqa on top and called Muslim now for almost 5 centuries, just like the church in Istanbul, Hagia Sophia. The list B of the Balkan countries with unending lust toward power, control, and terror, performative and forced alignment, a list which sides with a collectivity of anti-Albanian sentiment and anti-Western sentiment. Let's call this list B from the Balkans the Neo-Yugoslavia. Communism in Albania, the fall of communism in Yugoslavia and its wars, the Greek financial crisis, are all attributed as the fault of the West. Therefore, for a long time, and especially in the 21st century, Balkan countries have been collectively developing anti-Western sentiment. The fall of Yugoslavia and its ancestors that directly took power in Serbia are extremely resentful towards the West and anything Western. The fall of Hoxha Imam communism in Albania and its ancestors that directly have power in today's Albanian politics are extremely resentful towards the West and anything Western. The list B of Balkan countries starts with Serbia, as I've mentioned in previous essays. Serbia is the cancer and facilitator of the white and black cube in the Balkans, with a lot of help from Turkey and Iran. Right when the war in Iran started, the Serbian president, out of shock, started to blame the West and compare and parallelize the war in Iran with the war in Kosovo. Albania is completely controlled by this Serbian and Muslim terror in the Balkans, no more than a few years ago. What Russians are fighting for and planning to occupy territory in Ukraine, the Serbian president, together with the list B or the Neo-Yugoslavia, almost got regions of Kosovo for free. Let me repeat it again. What Ukraine and Russia are fighting for, the white and black cube in Balkans, or the list B or the Neo-Yugoslavia, almost gave free territories to Serbia without any kind of war. The Albanian politicians and the Kosovar politicians that are completely controlled were on a holy mission and campaign to give territories for free to Serbia. Let me repeat it again. Albanian institutions and politics are so deeply controlled that its generic politicians almost gave away territory for free. If opposition didn't stop them, they would have given the territory away for free. Meanwhile, Ukraine and Russia are fighting for 3+ years for the same situation. And just this week, the Ukrainian president visits and develops relations with Serbia instead of Kosovo, which it has supported Ukraine from day one. Serbia, together with Albania, Macedonia, no more than a few years ago, initiated this open Balkan idea of, or a neo Yugoslav idea of building something like the Schengen area in the Balkans. And there are numerous ways where the Albanian Prime Minister and his team have completely abandoned the Albanian population in Kosovo by catering to Serbia and following it like a dog follows its own tail. Serbia attacked Kosovo in the year 2023 after it has failed to get the territories for free. It tried to do it through war with its terror proxies. And the list B of Europe and its white cube is still silent about this attack, and no responsibility has been taken or given. How can the Ukrainian president cooperate with Serbia, a known Russian collaborationist that literally is doing Albanians the same things that Russians are doing to Ukrainians? What is this abomination, you might ask? It's the white cube of Europe, where in the northern corner of Europe, Russia is being countered and fought by war. And in the southern part, where a Russian proxy state of Serbia for centuries is terrorizing Albanians, is being supported and enabled, to the point where the Ukrainian president declares support for the Serbian position. In the north, in its country, he's fighting Russians, and in the south, he's kissing Russian proxy states. Things are not adding up. The Ukrainian war is an abomination in itself. It's the same pattern of hypocrisy and deceit. The Albanian Prime Minister performatively attacks Serbia while at the same time heavily and deeply collaborating with Serbia and the Neo-Yugoslavia. The Italian Prime Minister performatively distancing herself from the mass migration in Spain as if it's a one-time occurrence. Serbia, Albania, Macedonia, Bosnia, Montenegro, Greece. This is the Balkan Neo-Yugoslavia, or the List B. That is in cooperation with the List B from Europe, pushing Balkans and Europe towards performative and forced alignment. Of course, with the help of the Muslim terror wave and the List B of the world. Just a few days ago, a defensive pact between Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan was formed, and if you have some basic individuality, you should be able to realize who is the fourth member of the pact. What does a defensive pact like that do to an already agitated and radical Muslim population? Does it calm it down or agitate it more? Think a little bit. What does the Muslim Palestinian that was forced into war and caged and used as shield and was force-fed with anti-Western propaganda and has immigrated and living in Europe, at the same time his tribe is building defensive pacts? What sort of an effect would that have on the Muslim individual and collective in the Western body? The answer is crystal clear: more radicalization, more agitation. I would like to emphasize that I have a clear picture of the entire planet's List B in detail, of countries pushing to destroy the super rare Western push for a freedom, authentic freedom alignment, and pushing the planet towards a global war. I just choose to unfold the B-list slowly, taking in consideration concurrent political and social developments, evolutions or devolutions of countries. When my heart stops, or when the planet is right before the great calamity, the whole picture will be available. A cube of light environment is possible and effective only in the upcoming kingdom of heaven. When the radical cube of darkness has evolved beyond its destructive and controlling appetite towards humans, and when the radical white cube evolves beyond its deceptive and controlling appetite towards humans, that is when the entire planet will be under a kingdom of heaven. And that is when humans individually and collectively can truly live in open environments, systems, in a history of light, in a present of light, and a future of light.
Above all, you must understand that in the last days, scoffers will come, scoffing and following their own evil desires. They will say, "Where is this coming he promised?" Ever since our ancestors died, everything goes on as it has since the beginning of creation. But they deliberately forget that long ago, by God's word, the heavens came into being, and the earth was formed out of water and by water. By these waters also, the world of that time was deluged and destroyed. By the same word, the present heavens and earth are reserved for fire, being kept for the day of judgment and destruction of the ungodly. But who can endure the day of his coming? Who can stand when he appears? Every hand will go limp, every leg will be wet with urine. They will put on sackcloth and be clothed with terror. Every face will be covered with shame, and every head will be shaved. They will throw their silver into the streets, and their gold will be treated as a thing unclean. Their silver and gold will not be able to deliver them in the day of the Lord's wrath. I will sweep away everything from the face of the earth, declares the Lord. I will sweep away both man and beast. I will sweep away the birds in the sky and the fish in the sea and the idols that cause the wicked to stumble. When I destroy all mankind on the face of the earth, declares the Lord, I will stretch out my hand against Judah and against all who live in Jerusalem. I will destroy every remnant of Baal worship in this place, the very names of the idolatrous priests, those who bow down on the roofs to worship the starry host, those who bow down and swear by the Lord, and who also swear by Molech, those who turn back from following the Lord, and neither seek the Lord nor inquire of him. Be silent before the sovereign Lord, for the day of the Lord is near. The Lord has prepared a sacrifice. He has consecrated those he has invited. On the day of the Lord's sacrifice, I will punish the officials and the king's sons and all those clad in foreign clothes. On that day, I will punish all who avoid stepping on the threshold, who fill the temple of their gods with violence and deceit. On that day, declares the Lord, a cry will go up from the fish gate, wailing from the new quarter, and a loud crash from the hills. Wail, you who live in the market district. All you merchants will be wiped out. All who trade with silver will be destroyed. At that time I will search Jerusalem with lamps and punish those who are complacent, who are like wine left on its dregs, who think the Lord will do nothing, either good or bad. Their wealth will be plundered, their houses demolished. Though they build houses, they will not live in them. Though they plant vineyards, they will not drink the wine. The great day of the Lord is near, near and coming quickly. The cry on the day of the Lord is bitter. The mighty warrior shouts his battle cry. That day will be a day of wrath, a day of distress and anguish, a day of trouble and ruin, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and blackness, a day of trumpet and battle cry against the fortified cities and against the corner towers. I will bring such distress on all people that they will grope about like those who are blind because they have sinned against the Lord. Their blood will be poured out like dust, and their entrails like dung. Neither their silver nor their gold will be able to save them on the day of the Lord's wrath. In the fire of his jealousy, the whole earth will be consumed, for he will make a sudden end of all who live on the earth. Disaster. Unheard of disaster. See, it comes. The end has come. The end has come. It has roused itself against you. See, it comes. Doom has come upon you who dwell in the land. The time has come. The day is near. There is panic, not joy, on the mountains. I am about to pour out my wrath on you and spend my anger against you. I will judge you according to your conduct and repay you for all your detestable practices. I will not look on you with pity. I will not spare you. I will repay you for your conduct and for the detestable practices among you. Then you will know that it is I, the Lord, who strikes you. But they deliberately forget that long ago, by God's word, the heavens came into being, and the earth was formed out of water and by water. By these waters also, the world of that time was deluged and destroyed. By the same word, the present heavens and earth are reserved for fire, being kept for the day of judgment and destruction of the ungodly. But do not forget this one thing, dear friends. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. The Lord is not slow in keeping his promise, as some understand slowness. Instead, he is patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance.